Hi everyone, welcome back to the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. On today's show, I have Nathan Dunne as my special guest. Nathan was born in Brisbane, Australia, and grew up in India. After graduating from the University of Sydney with the University Medal, he studied art history at Cambridge University and received a PhD from Birkbeck College, University of London. He has lectured at Harvard and Yale and also worked for several years at Tate Modern. As a journalist and critic, he has contributed to many publications, including The Washington Post, The Atlantic, The Boston Globe, The Guardian, Slate and Artforum. Nathan is the author of When Nothing Feels Real, a memoir about depersonalisation, which was published in June 2025. And I think we're going to have a hell of a lot to talk about. So, Nathan, do you want to say hi?
Yes. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I believe that you are right. I believe that we will have much to talk about. I've been looking forward to it. So thank you.
No worries. I'm glad you're up for it as a fellow person who understands the world of dissociation. So yes, I think it's going to be very interesting. Where do we think is best to start in terms of, I guess, kind of context for the listeners? Do you want to kind of start from when you kind of first had the kind of depersonalization? Do you want to give a bit of background to your life at all? Like, totally up to you where you want to kind of start the conversation from.
Well, thank you for laying the ground so openly for me. Why don't we start with the onset to just explain how this illness came into my life? Because, as you very well know, so many DPDR sufferers have different onsets, different reasons for the onset, and
Mm.
also have very different symptoms. And even if those symptoms are shared among patients, they can be variable.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was 2008, and I was in the first few months of an incredibly intense relationship with a completely enchanting woman called Maria. And having moved in together, we used to stay up late at night. And there was one evening, late evening, I would say, that she suggested, why don't we go for a midnight swim? And we were living together in North London at the time. And she suggested that we get on our bikes and ride over to Hampstead Heath.
Mhm.
And it was the middle of winter, so it was very, very cold, like bitterly cold. So the streets, as you might imagine, all sensible people were indoors under their rugs or, holed up in front of their televisions or whatever. But because, again, it was a new relationship when we were wanting to embrace excitement and romance, let's say, we decided to go for this swim. And after dropping our bikes at the side of the pond, we dove in, and it was like the shock of the cold was fairly great.
Mhm.
But that was just exciting. It was uh, the atmosphere kind of had that midwinter kind of fog about the water too. So it was really quite something. And something happened to me though during that swim, which was the kind of great onset for me.
Mhm.
And even though this was an incredibly romantic event, or at least that's the way that we had wanted it to be, what began as a romantic idea or a romantic adventure immediately turned into a nightmare.
Mhm.
And I describe it in the book as though a great hand came and removed a part of myself. The sense of self that I had, the kind of me, the I that I understood, was kind of vacated, was kind of withdrawn involuntarily from me.
Mhm.
And the way that that played out late that kind of winter night was that I swam immediately towards the bank, climbed out, and I was there on the heath. And I just basically completely did not know who I was. I lost my sense of self. I couldn't quite recall my name. I didn't know who Maria was, her face. I was very much dissociating, and I had no language for dissociation at the time. I didn't know what really dissociative illnesses were, or
Mhm.
certainly what depersonalization was. And so that was a very, what I think back now, it was a fairly dramatic onset for me because my life completely changed that night. And it's like a before and after for me. And as
Mhm.
you might imagine, in the many years since that event took place, I've done many hours of not only, like, let's just call it very mildly, personal contemplation about what really took place, but also many
Mhm.
hours of professional work with a series of doctors about what actually happened, why it happened, and the aftermath. So that moment for me is very much kind of picked over so much.
Yeah.
And so it's very, I guess I say that as a kind of way to underline the complexity of the way that sits in my memory now.
Mhm.
But so there's only so much that I can do to articulate the facts of what happened. But basically, those are they. That is what happened.
Mhm.
And in the following days, basically, Maria got up the next morning to go to work. I was left alone in the flat, and I basically began to spiral completely out of control because I looked into the mirror. I didn't know who I was. I was having trouble recalling aspects of my past, like in terms of my life history, my memories. Everything
Mhm.
was kind of jumbled up into this kind of horrific collage in my head, and I did kind of various basic, I guess, ill-informed and naive, I see now at the time, things to kind of calm myself. Uh, but if we fast forwarded that a little bit, I ended
Mhm.
up in hospital after a suicide attempt. So it really was this moment of my life where I was 28 at the time. So I guess one would call me fairly young in my 20s. And
Mhm.
suddenly, uh, yeah, everything was kind of, I mean, I'm reaching for cliches here, but, shattered, broke open. Um, and subsequent to me returning home from hospital, the relationship itself broke down because I couldn't really articulate to my partner what was wrong with me. And the relationship was still fairly new. And so the kind of level of commitment that it would have involved for her to kind of stick with me was a lot to ask. And I'm more forgiving about it now that I look back at the
Mhm.
age that I am now, why she left. And but at the time it was completely devastating. So not only did I have the onset of depersonalization, but the relationship and the love that I had, the romance that I had, completely collapsed, and I was left. Perhaps the worst thing of all, I was left alone. Uh,
Mhm.
so I think that maybe sets the ground in terms of the
Yeah.
onset. So if you had any kind of questions that flow from that, I'm happy
Yeah.
to talk more
Yeah.
about that detail or what happened afterwards.
Mhm. I really appreciate you, yeah, being so like open and honest about it. And d- I think the first question that comes to mind for me is, do you regret going for the swim, having thought about it so much, or do you just think actually the depersonalization would have caught up to you at some point? Like, I can only imagine how much you've thought and rethought about it.
Hmm. It is such a great question. And I'm sure that you'll be able to appreciate that in therapy. We are often taught that the way that you can deal with very difficult or traumatic moments of the past, it is to not regret.
Mm.
However, I would not be stupid enough to say that I wish that I hadn't gone for the swim. Like, most certainly it was, uh, an event that changed everything for me and the course of my life. And so I definitely wish that I could replay that kind of sliding doors moment for sure.
Mm.
How, however, I mean, to answer the second part of your question, which is that would it have caught up with me anyway? I do believe that the answer to that is yes.
Mhm.
I believe that the onset would have come in some other form at some other moment. It just so happened that it was a fair, I mean, it's not the most extreme thing to do to go for a swim in the middle of winter, but
No, no.
it's not, it's unusual enough to kind of stick out as an event that, hey, maybe I shouldn't have done that, and it certainly caused a lot of problems. Um,
Mm.
but there are many more dramatic moments that people go through in their lives, and they don't have these kind of onset of this illness. So that's one of the things
Yeah.
that I've grappled with. But to answer your question, I most certainly wish that we had never gone for a swim,
Mhm.
especially in that particular place at that particular time in that particular season. Uh, However, looking back at, let's call it my youth, I understand the impulse. Like, I can understand how I got to that place, and I can
Mhm.
very faintly recall the excitement that attended that initial impulse too. Like, I can
Mhm.
understand why, oh, we're in love. This might be a really exciting thing to do that we'll look back on with, uh, you know, fondness or, some minor glee, at least. In the book, I write at length about the particular conditions of water and my interaction with water subsequently. And
Mhm.
that's perhaps even more something, the thing that I regret or that I'm sorry about the most, which is that the substance of water changed for me in my life. Like, it became this, for want of a better way of articulating it, a trigger. And
Mhm.
so, being in a shower, or washing one's hands, or even at various points driving past bodies of water, whether that be a lake out the window, the sea, like even a pool that might be in, like, that you could see driving through a town or whatever, those
Mhm.
became very difficult for me. And obviously, the world has no shortage of water. It is the stuff of
Yeah.
life. So it became incredibly difficult for me to deal with or negotiate that after this initial event.
Mhm. It kind of almost sounds like the kind of cold water almost like jump started the
Mm,
kind of symptoms to just like almost immediately like chronic levels, which to
mm,
me sounds wild because in comparison, for me, mine built up from
mm,
kind of feelings of seconds, minutes, hours, and then chronic over the course of
yes.
months. So I cannot imagine like this a switch being like flipped. Like
Yeah.
that's wild.
No, it's interesting that you say it. That, I mean, I love that you said that switch being flipped, because I've had a number of doctors suggest to me that that is actually what happens, in terms of there's a commonality with the onset in a number of patients. Like, it is, like, if you imagine like a switchboard at a house or at an office or something, if we can visualize that, it is, I think, for a lot of people, and definitely people that I've interviewed as well, there is like a switch that's being flipped. And I think that, hearing your kind of patient testimony just now, just listening to you, I think that that makes a lot of sense to me too. And
Mhm.
the the manner in which I think it, like, builds up, as you say, I think it probably was building up for me, but unlike yourself, I was unaware of it for some way. Like, maybe it was kind of, uh, it was burbling along in some way that I was coping with it in some, or I was able to defer it somehow, or I don't
Mhm.
I don't exactly know, but from what I understand, there is a moment like the way that you talked about, like the shock of the water, like suddenly it kind of fast forwarded into this chronic, uh, these chronic symptoms, this chronic illness. Then there must have been some buildup. I mean, I mean, in the research that I did, I now understand that many DP patients, there is a genetic predisposition. And I think as I've gotten older, one of the things which I've had to kind of contend with is that I believe in my case that there was some kind of genetic predisposition. And people might disagree with that, and that might not map directly onto their own cases. But looking
Mhm.
at my own kind of patient history and my own experience, I do think that there was something like what you've described as, beginning seconds, minutes, hours. I think that
Mm.
mine began maybe like a lot earlier, but I wasn't aware of it until this moment that the switch was flipped. Uh, but as you will very well know, the nature of depersonalization, its onset and its symptoms make I mean, I can definitely say for sure in my case that it's very difficult to put your finger on, even if I can isolate the exact event and how it occurred, it's very
Mm.
difficult to kind of map out a very clear trajectory as that A led to B led to C.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I kind of feel as well like the more you kind of think about it and unpick it, the more you're kind of feeding the feeling, which is really frustrating because like the logical like bit of me wants to work out like why is this happening, but actually unless you can get to a kind of point where you're like I feel like this, it's fine, but
Mm,
I'm definitely not there yet. Like it's still so jarring and I've had it for
mm,
like years. So it's such a
mm.
it's so nice to talk to someone who gets it because it's so hard to explain to other people.
Yes, it is incredibly hard. And I've spent, a lot of time trying to articulate and re-articulate. And when you write a book about it, you have awesome editors that are telling you, "Hey, what the hell does this really mean again? Can we can we make this clearer? Like, people aren't going to get this. What do you mean you were living outside of your body?" It's like, um,
That's
so
exactly what was happening.
yeah, but the process of trying to articulate it is definitely one of the challenges, especially when you have an experience of these symptoms and then you go to the GP for the first time, which was, the next stage in the story after my onset was going to a GP in London and trying to tell them about the experience that I had and the sensory and the kind of physiological experience of the world that I was having and how that altered from before the onset. And because so many GPs are used to treating depression and anxiety, then I was immediately put into one of those boxes, and I can completely understand how that happens.
Mm.
But essentially, I was misdiagnosed, which delays things further, and that is all part of the language. That is all part of being able to speak clearly about your symptoms so that then the clinic, as it were, can recognize the actual condition and the symptoms that you have rather than just trying to treat you in this within this kind of general okay, you have bad mental health, let's throw some SSRIs at you, etc.
Yeah.
It's having to negotiate a lack of awareness and a lack of understanding it at a clinical level is also one of the incredible challenges that people with DPDR face, and I certainly did. And
Hmm.
I mean, I'm curious actually about your own experience because, I
Hmm.
mean, I'm not entirely sure, but I imagine that you're quite a bit younger than me. But in 2008, it was still possible to type into a search engine, I am living outside my body, I'm looking at myself from above, I'm living in a box in my head, a black box full of water, these kinds of things that are very
Yeah.
abstract and very strange. And now, if you do that, like if we were to, pause this podcast and Google now, it immediately comes up with depersonalization.
Hmm.
And back when I was post my onset, when I tried to kind of immediately ask the internet what was actually wrong with me, there was nothing. And so
Hmm.
I guess one of the positive things that we can probably say in 2026 is that in the last 15, 20 years, there has been a growth in awareness. And maybe that's partly to do with the growth of the internet and the growth of groups forming online, which, certainly allowed us to connect today as we have.
Yeah.
But one of the laments that I have is that what is available for people when they begin suffering today was not available to me online back then. Um, so it's interesting. Did you find that there was information readily available for yourself when you
Yeah,
began having symptoms?
that's a really good question. I think so. I'm 31 now, and I think I've probably had this experience for like 5 years, maybe 5 or 6.
Okay,
Um, and I think I'm trying to remember if Unreal Charity was around then, because I think
you
I
might have just started. I think.
yeah I think I managed to find them, and I was like, oh my word, they're
Oh,
UK
wonderful.
based. And I was like, I think I went to one of their first like peer groups they ever did.
Oh, good,
Um,
good.
so I
Yes.
think I was lucky, but I imagine I didn't find that information for like maybe like a year later kind of
Oh,
thing,
wow.
because
Okay. So it actually
it
interesting.
was, yeah, I think because I was probably Googling like because it was I describe my kind of like the onset as like I would get flashes of not like feeling connected to my hands and stuff. Like it'd be a few
Yes.
seconds of like whoo, and then I'd be
Mm,
okay. But then it
mm,
kind of obviously progressed. So I think maybe initially I was like searching to do with the kind of time frame rather than kind of the experience
I
necessarily,
see.
like feeling separate for like a few seconds kind of thing.
Mm,
um, but I think I was lucky in that I think maybe Unreal had just, if it hadn't just started, it had been going kind of only for a little bit when, yeah, I was having
mm.
the
That makes
symptoms.
a
And
lot
I,
of sense
yeah.
because Joe Perkins, who was definitely part of the founding of the Unreal Charity, he
Mm,
told me that he became aware of a potential correct diagnosis for what he was suffering when Jane Charlton, who was also another one of the founders of the Unreal Charity, published a long article in the Guardian in, I believe, 2016. And it was a long form article that went in depth about uh, her onset, which was a kind of like a pot or marijuana gummy was put in some yogurt when she was abroad, like on a summer European holiday or something. And then
okay.
after that, she began experiencing kind of chronic symptoms, and it's such a clear it's such a clear account of her experience. And Joe said that after reading that, it was very compelling that that's exactly what he was suffering from. And at the time, there really wasn't, much mainstream coverage of the condition. And
Mm,
I think that article helped a lot of people, not only Joe, to really get a kind of clear-eyed first-person account of one patient. And then because they got connected through that, then thus Unreal was formed, with the help of doctors and things. So that's
mm.
that's really really interesting. Yeah, and that was, I mean, my onset was well before then because Joe's quite a bit younger than me too. But I'm so glad that you were aware of their initial peer groups when they started, because they certainly are invaluable. I think for people, just as we're talking now. when people, especially if they're newly diagnosed, can talk about their symptoms and there's a shared understanding, it really is so helpful.
Yeah, it kind of, because otherwise I kind of feel like when you're sat in front of a GP, like you sound a bit mad,
You
and you're
definitely
not.
do.
You're absolutely not mad. But
No.
when you're in a Zoom group full of people who also have the same symptoms, you're like, oh, okay, like I'm not the only one feeling this way. Um,
Mm.
yeah, it's very hard to, like you were saying, like to sit in front of doctors at clinics and be like, I don't feel like I'm here. Like, of course
Yes.
that's gonna sound a bit mad, but it's not. It seems like it's really like prevalent. It's just not known about. I think I was reading
Yes.
somewhere that it's like as prevalent as like bipolar disorder, which I know some people can get kind of wrongly diagnosed as. But
Mm.
it seems like it's definitely, you know, like underrepresented.
Definitely in the statistics that I have seen and has been shared with me by other depersonalization researchers, it's
Hmm.
I mean, partly because of what you just touched on about the difficulty of what happens when someone turns up and you're sitting in front of a GP, then so much of so much of how prevalent it is goes kind of unrecorded within like official medical records anyway. I mean, so many people are underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and so I guess within a wider population, there are inevitably going to be many more people experiencing it, and yet they don't necessarily interact with the medical system. Like, I mean, in obviously in the UK context, in the NHS, or if
Mm.
they do, then it's gone undetected within the NHS because of misdiagnosis as depression or anxiety related depression, as was my case, and and again, like I really hope that we're getting better at that. I mean, one of the
Hmm.
great ironies, Emily, for me was that I was living in London at the time, and yet I had no awareness of the Maudsley Clinic, which is,
Okay.
the chief depersonalization treatment center, which was actually started in the 1990s.
Hmm.
And I mean, when I think back to the fact that I was only like 4 or 5 tube stops away from world class leading specialists
Oh.
on depersonalization, and yet I not only didn't know that that was there, I didn't have a
Hmm.
name for my illness. The GPs couldn't tell me what was happening to me. And so, oh my goodness, I mean, for me, it was, I know a lot of people go for a lot longer within the system, but 3.5 years it took me for a kind of correct diagnosis of depersonalization. But I had to return to Australia and see doctors here before I found a specialist who could actually uh, like properly diagnose me, as it were. But
Mm.
the fact that I guess why I mention the irony is that even though I was diagnosed here in Australia, the world leading specialist was in South London, really close to where I just was.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It's like, I mean, yeah, it sometimes happens like that in life. It's you go away to come back, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, that's mad, isn't it? To think how close you were and then how you've probably gone the furthest distance possible to that
Yeah.
is frustrating. Um I can't believe it was like 3.5 years, did you say? That's mad to not know what your experience was for that long. Like
Mm.
how did you cope? How did you manage? How did you, because were you studying at the time as well?
I was. The short answer to the question is that I didn't, or
Mm.
I really struggled to cope. Uh, when the kind of romantic bottom fell out of my life after the uh, swimming event,
Mm.
I, lived alone as money drained out of my bank account, and as a student, there wasn't a terrible like I wasn't, exactly rich anyway. And so I really struggled. My whole focus became trying to figure out what was wrong with me.
Hmm.
And, you know, as an individual who is also sick, it was very difficult. And so it got to the point whereby, months and months and months passed. I still wasn't, quote unquote, getting better. And so I accepted an invitation from a friend in America. And I thought that maybe moving to the West Coast briefly or whatever, I had various ideas at the time, but I just thought in a very simplistic fashion, maybe if I go from gray sky to blue sky, that will help a little bit. And
Yeah, a
so
change of
I,
scenery, even.
ex- exactly, thank you. That's perfectly put. But I mean, in true biblical fashion, you can't run away from your problems. You take them with you. And so I
Hmm.
certainly did. And it was the best thing was that at least, even though I was still ill, I was with a friend.
Mm.
And so I lived with her. She supported me the best that she could. And, she was basically a kind of, I mean, she's was like a live-in therapist. We kind of worked through a lot. She was an incredible help to me, not just helping get me through that period that you asked about, like that. But
Hmm.
I wasn't there. I wasn't there for the whole time. I kind of came back to London, and I was thinking about quitting studying, and I didn't actually leave the I didn't actually stop studying, but I just stopped working. So I was still enrolled, but I wasn't really able to go to the library or do research or read. And, as a person who is very interested in the life of the mind and exploring ideas and, basically being a student, it's
Mm.
obviously very frustrating when you can't read, when you don't have any energy or uh, you're just consumed by being sick. So life's plans, whether they be romantic or like studious, like going to the student library or whatever, the college library, you just can't do any of that. So I kind of, it was so up and down, like such a roller coaster period. Like sometimes I would think that I would know what was wrong with me. Like I'd find something that I thought, oh, I'd have like a false aha moment. Um,
Right.
but then that would quickly prove itself to not yield any like dilution of my symptoms or any, wouldn't make me quote unquote feel any better. And so therefore I'd be kind of lost again. So it was so a great foggy period. And in terms of understanding and direction. It seems like there was a kind of a period of arrested development, if you
Hmm.
will. And I'm
Hmm.
not really sure how I studied in such like little bits and pieces during that time. Um, and but yeah, it was only after 3.5 years through so many different doctors and specialists and that I actually found someone.
Hmm. And I read as well that your mum suggested that you should maybe kind of return home to Sydney. Was that quite a big kind of shift for you, I guess, again, from grey skies to blue skies, but also to have to go back home?
100%. I mean, I at that point when I decided to go from London to Sydney, I really didn't. I was kind of at the end of myself. I feel like I had exhausted all of the relationships in my life, all of the doctors. I'd completely lost trust in
Hmm.
like any doctor or psychotherapist telling me that they could help me, or I was so sick of being told, no, you should take this new cocktail of medication. I was basically, to put it bluntly, I just lost hope with ever being able to be helped, understood, or healed.
Hmm.
And so when I came back even though my mother suggested that, I return to like the family house and I live and in until I could basically sort out this illness, what was really wrong with me.
Mm.
It was an incredibly difficult thing to do because I didn't think that moving anywhere would help. I'd already had a stint in America. I'd relied on various friends, and when I came back here, the family house wasn't able to really. I basically lived in the garage, so and I
Okay.
write about that. And so when I think back, as a young person with hopes and dreams about what you're going to do with your life and its possibilities and the people that you might meet, the places that you might go, that kind of the optimism of youth. I
Hmm.
feel like it was really, it was really struck from me because I had embraced my youth and look where it had left me. And obviously the picture is more complicated now, and the way that I have kind of processed that
Mm.
is very different. But to come back to live with your parents again when you're going into your 30s, with no money, no friends, and to be sick and to live in the garage, it's pretty rough to put it.
Yeah.
you know
When you
it's
put it like that.
it's pretty it's and at the beforehand I was meeting other people in the student body. I was going to gigs, like I was just being, I was exploring London, one of the most exciting and crazy and chaotic cities in the world. And I had all the energy to do that until this moment where I wasn't
Yeah.
my relationship failed. I wasn't able to study, so everything kind of collapsed. And so yeah, it was super tough to come back and just be like, okay, where am I at? And
Yeah.
I'm nowhere good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly that.
And so it's a kind of moment where you think, how am I going to rebuild this, or how am I going to get through it enough that I can rebuild
Mhm.
relationships as well as health?
Parents are kind of the only ones that kind of stick through it with you when you can't, it's a lot to expect a partner to understand. It's who you surround yourself with.
Yes, it's so true. And absolutely. And I touch on it. In the book, I write about some of the ways in which uh, I was made fun of as well by the partner that I was with, and partly I think that's a way of coping. Like when you when you
Yeah.
come to the dinner table and you tell a romantic partner that this is what's wrong with you, they're like, "Wow, what am I saddled up with here?" And because I think in relationships, trust and understanding is so important. If you say that I have, if one says, "Look, I have this thing that's overtaken my life," I think it's very
Mm.
difficult for a partner to be without or to be relieved of the authority of being able to help you. Not only do they
Mhm.
not understand, but you need them, but they can't. How do I put it? They I think it's difficult to be without knowledge. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I think is very rewarding, if you are able to help like someone in your family or a friend when they're going through a difficult time, they call on you, or they share something with you and you have a conversation or even multiple conversations, and you're able to say, look, I've read this, or in my experience, or I have a friend who went through this. Then the fact that you are deferred to by your friend
Mm.
is fine because you've been able to help. But I think with something like depersonalization, which is so difficult for even doctors to understand, then the partner's just left literally being unable to help despite how incredibly willing they might be.
Mhm.
And so a kind of mode, to make fun of, even gently kind of poke, make jokes about, seems like a natural mode when that kind of authority or that knowledge is removed.
Yeah.
And I'm not like using authority and like they need to be like a big know-it-all and tell you the way that, everything that's wrong with you. But the level of abstraction, um, in language about depersonalization, when you try and talk to even closest loved ones, it can just be very bewildering, and they just kind of throw up their hands and be like, you know, yeah, it's so. I definitely had that experience as well, where it's like it's easier for people to jest uh,
Yeah.
as a way of coping with the difficulty and the weird power imbalances of the situation. But you're right. I mean, if one has a good relationship with the parents, then the parents, certainly don't do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's. I think it's so important to find those people who will just be able to listen to you and take you seriously, even if they don't understand. And often, I mean, here's something, a phrase that's always stuck with me, Emily.
Mm.
When I went through this very difficult period of the 3.5 years of not knowing, when I would try and speak to various friends about it, someone said something to me which really stuck with me, and they said, "Look, most people don't want to go on the journey with you," and I think that journey is the journey of like unknowing and uncertainty. They don't want to be with you while you're like frantically Googling. They don't want to be with you and go on like the full journey with you, because they have their
Mm.
own lives and their own challenges and their own relationships to navigate. And so to immediately sign up a friend, unwilling to go on this incredibly like dark journey with you is, even the best of friends are going to be challenged by that. At least that was my experience. And um, I'm sure people have examples where friends really are there for them in a way that like a
Yeah.
really close family member would be. But I find even like incredibly good people, good, well-meaning, lovely people in kind of like regular, healthy life
Mm.
find it very difficult to go on the full whack of depersonalization with somebody.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I've always kind of felt like I always say to my parents, like, I wish you could experience what I'm experiencing for just like a minute or two, because the closest thing they can get to is, understanding it from a kind of mental health anxiety sort of thing, because
Yes.
most people have experienced maybe some form of anxiety that they can kind of relate it to. But it's just so many times I'm like, I wish for a minute or 2 minutes you could have this feeling, because it's so weird and I can't explain it properly. I don't know
Mm.
if you felt like that.
Oh, for sure. So if I can share this, if I can share this pocket, this parcel of dissociation with you, can we, but absolutely. And I think
Mm.
that's why when you meet somebody who's had, if you can share the experience with someone who's also, that's why that's why it's so valuable, or it certainly can be very valuable, because they actually have experience and they do share it.
Mhm.
Uh, And I think that I like to think that increasingly there are doctors who are exposed to dissociative illnesses in their training, and there are treatment options which they learn through a kind of medical school, and people like researchers like Dr. Emma Cernus and others are
Mm.
doing that work. But I think if we look at the history of depression, I mean, it's always, let's say, within the 20th century, after the various wars and everything, everyone always, I think that there's a great understanding that people got depressed. But I think treatment options and the mainstream understanding, awareness, and treatment, more importantly, the treatment options for people who were depressed, it really only, I mean, people might have different dates for this, but it really only kind of took off in the 80s, the early 80s. It took,
Mm.
uh, and now where we sit in the 21st century, even then, there is so much awareness of depression and anxiety that it's embedded in workplaces. People can have mental health days. Children
Yeah.
are aware of it in schools. Like, so much of it is embedded in education. That it's okay to speak about when you're depressed, and so many positive changes have made. But if my dates are even vaguely correct about a mainstream awareness kind of coming about in the 80s, the early to mid 80s, then it took a long time for that to become more comprehensively embedded within the culture to make it structurally meaningful for someone who's going through depression and anxiety. So
Mm.
I think my optimism is that as you and I are talking now, and we have experienced depersonalization, then as time goes on, then I like to think that exactly the same thing will take place. And maybe an immediate example might be the example that I just gave earlier, which was that when I first consulted the internet for what was wrong with me back in 2008, there was no real information about depersonalization, dissociation, and its treatment options, but now there certainly is. So,
Mm.
I mean, the fact that it pops up on a few internet pages is obviously not the kind of comprehensive structural change that we need, but
Yeah.
it is like as a kind of anecdotal or as a kind of slim example of just what time was able to do, then
Hmm.
I think I like to think that the same thing can kind of happen. I mean, I didn't mean to go into like a weird history lesson there, but I was just
No, no, no.
just thinking about, yeah, that's where my optimism goes on days when I'm feeling like no one will understand or there's not really any help for people. Then
Yeah.
those are the kind of things I can think about.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that kind of leads quite nicely on to, like, I was going to ask you your experience of therapy. And I guess, and I read your mum had put a number on the fridge in the garage to be like, ring this number. Like, it could be kind of helpful. And that's how you kind of found like a specialist. Can you kind of, maybe if we pick up the story from there almost, and you can explain how that kind of went and what sort of therapy, and if you found therapy helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking. Uh, I did eventually call the number. I went to see the specialist, even though there had, as I was saying earlier, there had been so many that I'd seen.
Mm.
And so I went in there. I went into this particular clinical appointment where with pretty low expectations, but the doctor who when I read about it, I call him Dr. C in the book. Then he was unlike any other doctor that I had been exposed to, in the sense that he not only was trained and understood dissociative patients and in particular depersonalization, but he also had quite a long history of treating patients with OCD. And
Okay.
when I prior to meeting this doctor, the way that I understood OCD was like, in the movies, like someone washing their hands or whatever, or like checking the locks on the doors, those kinds of things. But I had no real idea that OCD was also to do with involuntary or intrusive thoughts. And
Hmm.
I mentioned that because that was the doctor's background. And so he was able to see that there was the way that kind of neuroscience dovetailed with psychology in a way. I mean, he just basically just had done a lot of work and seen a lot of people, to put
Yeah.
it that way. And so I articulated to him my symptoms as I had done many times before. And he said that he had read my patient history, which I had sent my medical kind of records and stuff I'd sent in advance. And very quickly during our first meeting, he said that, look, I think that a correct diagnosis for you is depersonalization. And that was the first time I ever heard that word. And boy, did it make a lot of sense to me. Just even, just the word, just the it just made a lot of sense to me. Like to be depersoned, to be that spoke to the kind of experience of like a second self, or like living outside your body, and
Mm.
so the treatment options that I began with him were, we tried uh, like a particular form of CBT, which was like what they call like a Stebb's diary, which is just like homework about that a lot of people would be familiar with, about the scale of your emotions and the particular behaviors and the situations that you find yourself in at different times of the day, and you rate them kind of on scales. And then
Mhm.
as that data piles up over time, you're able to see, like, this diary over a week, the fact that the symptoms that you have actually fluctuate rather than they're not they're not static. It's not this
Yeah.
still kind of thing that you carry around. It's moving, it changes. um, but I found that very frustrating because the nature of CBT and the having to chart things out of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, or, like, I'm kind of like, I'm hot, I'm cold, or it seemed very didactic to me, very black and white, and I felt really boxed in a way. And for this particular reason, which is that the different things within the CBT diary seem to be contradictory. Like, I would be like, there wasn't like a clear, like, A equals B equals C. Like, sometimes I would have the same experience and feel completely differently.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it was basically just very confusing. It was very difficult to look at this uh, map that I had set out and see um, what was wrong. And so we moved from CBT into something that was actually quite a bit more helpful, which was um, a form of, like, exposure therapy, and that was to do with the onset, particularly with water. And this might
Mhm.
seem very strange to people who've never, if you're just listening to this and you've never heard of these kinds of exposure uh, before, it might sound very strange, particularly if a doctor has actually, prescribed this as a form of treatment. But he basically set out on his table like a kind of like what I would describe as like a kit. And say if a patient is, like, afraid of dirt, like they're afraid of contamination or germs, then the treatment
Mhm.
might be that you have a piece of mud or even like a small piece of excrement, if that's your greatest fear, and you fold it up many times in a tissue and you basically carry a piece of that around with you as a form of exposure. Um,
Okay.
that, like, I mentioned that as an example because it's probably the most common form that I used. And in my case, I was given a kind of like a clinical washcloth, or like a small piece of fabric that
Mhm.
at different times of the day I had to soak in water, and then I had to uh, bring it into contact with my skin to kind of trigger those initial sensations that I had back on that night with water, and things that I had, like, various behaviors that I'd developed over the years to kind of avoid contact with water and to avoid being, like, triggering the intensity of my symptoms. And
Mhm.
that did help a lot. Like, so I would, at different times of the day, I would try and bring this rag into contact with my skin for longer periods. And I did find over time that there was, like, it did dilute the intensity of the symptoms a little bit, uh, but it wasn't kind of wholesale enough to really bring down uh, the symptoms, because I think that it was trying to get to the root cause. It was trying to do two things at once, and it wasn't enough of either. Um, I mean, I went through a whole different bunch of treatments, so there'll be a whole podcast where I could talk about those. But I'll briefly
Oh,
mention
okay.
one of the, which is EMDR, which people might be
Yeah.
familiar with, which is to do with light sensory. Um, but the most important one, and and I'll draw a line under this one particularly because it was the one that helped me. And
Mm.
as you're familiar with the Unreal Charity and other people talking about depersonalization, you might be familiar with this, and that's RTMS. And at the time, which I should say for your listeners stands for repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, which basically is where you are in an office somewhere, a clinical environment, usually, sometimes in a hospital environment, and through a pretty sophisticated form of X-ray technology, magnets are used to identify, and then, sorry, magnets are used to stimulate parts of the brain which are seen as like underactive as a result of uh, the depersonalization. And at the time, around 2000 and well, going on 2011. This was a very new treatment, not widely available, certainly not in Australia. I don't believe the NHS offered it, so it would have been had to be in private treatment, even if you became aware of it. Uh, so the doctor that as you say, the number that I called after my mum kind of prompted me to do it. Then through this treatment, I eventually found myself in this kind of fledgling new kind of treatment of this magnetic stimulation, and over quite a few months, slowly that really began to help me. And I write about in the book that it diluted the symptoms by about 80%, which was extraordinary, Emily.
Wow.
And so it really did help me. And people can find online, people can go on YouTube, and a lot of people with dissociative illness, and in particular depersonalization, talk about their own experiences in real time. Like you'll find YouTubers talking about, oh, I just came out of my fourth treatment of RTMS, sometimes just called TMS, and they talk about how they feel, if if they have soreness in their kind of head or whatever. But the one thing for people who are unfamiliar about it that I would want to stress is that even though magnets to the head or magnets to the brain sounds very extreme, these are very low level magnetic pulses. So it's nothing like a kind of ECT treatment. Like it's not a convulsive therapy, nothing like that. It's a very uh, non-invasive, very safe practice. At least that was my own experience. And it's
Okay.
become more commonly available and more commonly utilized by people with dissociative illnesses. Obviously, I am not a doctor. I'm just a patient who's been through this, and it was, recommended to me through referral. And this is also, I should say, again, like 15, 16 years ago now when I began this treatment, like 2011. But it was definitely the thing that kind of really changed things. It really turned things around. It was the straw that broke the camel, as they say. It really was something that was a very clear turning point in the narrative of what was happening to me at this point in my life. Uh, and it's
Okay.
interesting because over the past few months, I've had numerous people get in touch with me and tell me their own stories, and I've they have suggested to me that actually RTMS is much more widely available now. So again, like everybody's experience and onset is different, and treatment options, are different too. But those are the treatments that I went through. And I should also say that the other footnote is that I was in kind of a talking therapy or with a psychologist the whole time too, which was separate to this depersonalization specialist who I saw. So it was a combination of these things.
Yeah. Okay. That's so interesting. And in terms of the RTS therapy, is it something that you kind of have done a course of? Like, do you have to almost top it up every so often sort of thing? Or is it very much a you do this many sessions and then that's kind of all you can have sort of thing? Like how does that sort of work?
Such a good question. It really differs. So for me, I had this one fairly prolonged like series of like appointments. So there's different courses of treatment. Um, I have so I had this one kind of like intensive period where where this treatment was focused on my symptoms, my illness. But over the years, I've, as you say, which is I think a good way of putting it, which is like I've topped it up with different methods. So
Okay.
uh, I haven't actually gone through other courses of RTMS since then. For me, that was enough to
Right.
reorient my life to the point whereby I have not needed, or I haven't felt like I have needed it since. It was that effective.
Okay.
However, I should also say, again, to emphasize how everyone's experience is different, um, that in 2022, I'm sorry to say, after all this optimism, that I had a pretty big nervous breakdown, which again I write about in the book as a way of explaining, or as a way of that, recovery, or whatever we might call it, is not like it's not a one-off. These things kind of fluctuate, and different pressures
Yeah.
in life, come to the fore again, etc. So, but if we're talking about this one particular period in my life, which was this dramatic onset in 2008, and then 3.5 years later, I undergo this treatment. If we just
Mhm.
kind of block that time period of my life, the RTMS treatment was incredibly helpful in reorienting my life after then, to the point whereby, most importantly, my relationships began to improve. I was able to
Mhm.
move out of my parents' garage. I was able to study again. It made me more hopeful. I got some of that youthful energy back, even though I think I'll always carry that moment with me, that of what happened, the onset. But
Mm.
and I was slower. I didn't have as much energy. I was changed by it, of course, but it really did help me begin to live differently on a day-to-day basis, which is really all that I wanted. And
Yeah.
it was very slow, but in terms of the symptoms themselves being healed enough, or it being reduced to that kind of by 80%, was enough for me to be able to cope with the other challenges in life. And it
Mhm.
also weirdly it also felt like, because I was able to do in a way what I'd always dreamed, which was to kind of get rid of this thing, or at least to make it on the back burner rather than always in the front. If you'll,
Yeah.
if I put it that basically, then I knew that it was then possible.
Yeah.
I knew that going through this treatment, particularly, that I was going to be able to live without depersonalization being um, so overwhelmingly in control of my day to day. So that was incredibly important, and
Mhm.
that's why, yeah. So I'm very grateful for that, and especially because it was a new treatment at the time. I really can't believe, in a way. I mean, it's weird to talk about luck, but I'm really glad that I responded to my mother's suggestions, and that I found myself, in undergoing that treatment as I did.
Mhm. Don't you love it when mums are right? Damn
Oh,
it.
definitely, especially when, yeah, it's like the end justifies the means. It's like, Mum, I didn't believe you about all this stuff, and you were wrong about this, and I wish you didn't do this, but my God, thank you for this one.
Yeah. Exactly that. Oh, oh bless. Well, I'm glad, like it's so nice to hear like 80% of a difference. Like even
Yeah, a big
even
difference.
like yeah, even just like I'd love like 25% of a difference. Like
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, that's fascinating to like hear how much it's it's done for you. And I think that's kind of the problem with it is like right now for me, I'm I get so worried that I'm going to be stuck like this because I don't want to live my life in this state
yeah,
because it has no meaning. And I can totally understand why you know, like you said, like recovery isn't linear, and like you saying about having a breakdown and stuff, because like it gets on top of you, this feeling of like what if I'm stuck like this? What if this is just my experience now? And
mm,
all I can hold on to is that for however many years growing up, I wasn't like this. So
yes,
that there is a before. Um,
mm,
but it's so hard because you're just like, what if I'm stuck like this? And that's kind of the spiraling kind of thoughts, which I know doesn't help. But yeah,
yes,
it's interesting for you that a combination of talking therapies and like doing physical therapies kind of tackled it. And I know
yes,
like you've kind of mentioned as well, um, like it targets like is it the parietal lobe. I don't know how you say it.
Yes, the
Peri.
parietal lobe. Yes,
Yeah,
um,
reading about that is so interesting.
it is, isn't it? Yes, I actually had a clinical psychologist in Edinburgh contact me recently, saying that she had read my book and that actually um, the neuroscientific or the kind of like, let's call it the brain information, which again I largely got from Emma Cernus's research, is something
Mm,
that she has now shared with dissociative patients of her own, just as a way of not using my memoir as a form of treatment or anything, but it has kind of enough of that information, and then they can consult more kind of robust clinical sources and can actually be of help. And that's kind of
yeah.
one of the things that I think RTMS and this kind of magnetic treatment aims to do. Again, it's different for everyone, and I think there are definitely depersonalization. Like people would have experienced it, sorry, they've gone through the treatment and it doesn't help. So I'm very fortunate that it has, but depending on not everybody who's experienced DPDR has jumped into a pond in the at midnight in the middle of winter either. Like we all have our own ways of coming to the point where it enters our lives. And so
Mm,
similarly with treatments, right? And it's and I and I've even spoken to some people who actually a cocktail of medication actually does help. I mean, and that sometimes can make the difference, which again reorients their life to where they live it very differently and are able to get some of that kind of before back.
mm,
Uh, but yeah, it's interesting, just on a note that just as we're talking, I'm thinking of someone who got in touch with me last week, and they were saying they were telling me about something that really helped them, which was that they engaged in intense physical exercise every single day, and it
mm,
was in like martial arts. And the way that they put it to me was, try to feel outside your body when someone is pushing your face into the mat, when you're doing kind of like, in my silly brain, I think of it as like karate. If you're doing like intense karate in like a gym and it's
yeah.
so physical and you're being moved around so much, then it's not that the symptoms aren't there, but you are sufficiently engaged in this very intense, like physical, literally like a fight, even though you might
Well,
not.
you're
Then
under attack, aren't you?
yeah, so it's. I mean, and again, that I just mentioned that because that was like that was something that somebody tried. Put it that way,
Yeah.
and so and I could relate to that because I tried a whole bunch of different things. I mean, yeah, I tried crazy, like all kinds of things. And when I say crazy, I mean like just doing like weird puzzles and stuff, which is again something that I touch on. I just tried different things to access that before, which is I love the
Mm,
way that you put that, because I can definitely relate to that. So yeah, I mean, if people have others who they know have been through it, it's again about talking to talking to them, talking to people about what worked, particularly with them, and um, but yeah, my own case is RTMS treatment is you know was really helpful. I'm not sure actually in the on the NHS if it's available, maybe through referral, but you've got the Maudsley Clinic there in South London, which people who are interested, you can access through like the information sheets at the Unreal charity. And I think Joe
yeah.
Perkins even has a YouTube video where he kind of literally does like a video walkthrough of what it's like to go to the
Yes.
clinic, what the waiting times are, all
Yeah.
those kinds of things that can be quite helpful. So
Hmm. Yeah, I'll make sure to link that below. And also, like you said, Unreal Charity have a really good like resources page
they
on.
really do. Yeah.
I was gonna ask you a little bit more about kind of the process of writing the book and also all the kind of sort of PR around it as well. Like, what kind of sort of kind of push you towards? writing a book? Were you kind of writing your thoughts as you were experiencing all these symptoms? And also, I guess, did writing the book make your symptoms worse at all? Or does talking about your symptoms make them worse? Like, I'll be interested to know, like, for the rest of today, like, having talked about both of our symptoms, will our symptoms be slightly elevated kind of thing? Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of questions.
No, please, I'll ask away. I'm in absolutely no rush. I love this question because it's a literary question. It like leans into
Mhm,
more literary rather than medical, which is it's a very nice break. Uh, the reason why I wrote the book was that in 2019, I published a newspaper article talking about. It didn't go into anything like it was fairly brief. But
mm,
it basically was a first person experience where I said, hey, I had this onset. This was my experience. This is this thing called depersonalization. And that was my first kind of public outing. It was a kind of
mhm,
like almost like a trial run to see one, if I could write about it, two,
mhm,
if I could kind of get it published and people would read it and respond to it. And it was a real test case for seeing if I could write like a whole book about it. And yeah, the amount of people um, that got in touch or commented on the article made me not right away, but it did make me think maybe there is something in this. Maybe I can do this.
mm,
Uh, one of the one of the biggest challenges in writing the book itself was, I mean, if we put aside the fact that I had to revisit all these, the worst times in my life, that
yeah,
in a way that's a memoir. That's what you got to do. But
mm,
one of the most difficult things was actually structural because it was very important to me to write about my own experience, one, but it was very, very important for me to include the medical research in there.
yeah.
And for me to get my head around that, no pun intended, then I had to interview neuroscientists, read neuroscience, read academic reports, and to get my handle on that material. But then, in terms of writing the book, how do I write in a way these two books as one? So the writing process was very difficult because I had to weave in structurally my own experience of me having the onset, going to hospital, the relationship breakdown, etc., as well
Mm.
as moving the text into, and according to so and so in 1983 who published this, this is what was said about this. So that was very difficult, and like on the publishing side with editors and publishers, we went back and forth about for a really long time, much longer than I like to think, about how to do this properly, how
Yeah.
to stay true to the story of me living with this and through this, but also having enough information for people who, one, didn't know anything about dissociative illnesses, and two, enough help for people who had, that then they would be prompted to actually be helped by it.
Mhm,
Uh, So when the book is only like 300 pages or something, or like, slightly less,
mhm,
but it took so long those, to get that process to a point where it was like a book that would work together. Uh, and to answer the other part of your question, the 100% it required like me revisiting these difficult moments, which then, increased my symptoms. And that was like inevitable. And it wasn't only, I mean, because it wasn't just thinking about the onset, it was thinking about like, you have to kind of to write a book and like whole chapters on this stuff. You kind of have to really like kind of like live it properly to then articulate
yeah.
it with the, yeah. I mean, I've never really done anything like that before. And even to just think, okay, I'm going to write about myself and the worst parts of my life, like having no
Yeah.
friends, living in my parents' garage. It's not exactly the greatest advertisement for you as a person. So, some days when I'm sitting there writing, trying to get the sentences right and the paragraphs to work and everything, and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Presenting myself in the worst possible light. And so, but that's all part of it. And
Yeah.
that's in a way that's the job. But there is some kind of having met and interviewed, as part of the process, so many, or quite a few other people who'd been through their own experiences of this. I kind of
Mm.
kept coming back to that actually there is a like a purpose that's quite a bit larger than me. That if I can, you know, I mean, raise awareness or however one might put it, that it actually will serve something larger than myself, and there is merit in that. Like, I mean, I'm obviously not some saint. I'm sitting down to write about myself. It's an incredibly like egotistical in a way thing to do. However, it was more than just like my own catharsis. It was more than my own like I'm just gonna write about these moments. There was and the medical research really helped that
Mhm.
because it brings you into, for want of a way of putting it, like a third person as opposed to the first. Like
Yeah.
when a reader encounters the more medical parts, it moves into more of a different tone of voice. So, and I hope that I've been able to blend those enough that it's a kind of fairly easy reading experience. Uh, but those were helpful for me because it took me out of my own experience, and I could have a break from actually, writing about how bad things were, and how much how ill I was. Uh, so it's been an incredible experience because I've been able to finish it, which I never thought, and let
Mm.
alone actually for it to be published and come out is a whole other thing. Um, and the PR aspect, which you asked about at the end there, that's
Mm.
been oof, it's very intense and very exhausting because you kind of, as I am with you this evening, and I'm very grateful. I mean, sorry, it's my evening where I am. Then I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk about it. But it also does mean uh, talking to a lot of people about the worst things that happen to you repeatedly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that.
And that is challenging sometimes.
Mhm.
Last year, when the book first came out in June, it was most, because it was a lot, and particularly when you're interviewed for newspaper articles or people who write reviews of the book and things like that, you definitely get a sense of uh, the level of understanding and engagement or even care. And I don't know, it's
Yeah.
been a really interesting process of kind of you have to kind of let go at a certain point. But yeah, it's definitely been weird, like to have something come out which is about you, and then it's also I write. It's you know what, Emily, it's really interesting. There's this moment of the book which is maybe only covers 3 pages or something,
Mhm.
but and I didn't think it was a central part of the story, but people, readers, and like various DMs and things have asked me about it again and again. Like the biggest question that I get is about this part of the book, which is a really brief one, and it's not really related to depersonalization directly, but it's to do with this encounter that I have with an older woman called Angela. And I think very unusual it's unusual enough for people that they want to know more about it. So
Mhm.
I've heard a number of people say, "Oh, you should have written 3 chapters on that," and it's for for most people who haven't read it, it's just this moment where I'm back living in London after returning from Los Angeles, and um, I have this chance meeting with this older Canadian lady, and she's really able to help me through this brief period because she kind of understands me in a way without me having to explain. So
Mhm.
much, that you and I have been talking about in this conversation is about, going to doctors or as friends and just having to talk endlessly so that they try and maybe understand.
Mhm.
Whereas this woman really understood me almost instantly without having to like talk about it at length. And it was an extraordinary uh, that was an extraordinary moment in the story of kind of that period of my life. Um, but yeah, it's interesting and I only mention that because people are drawn to particular aspects of the story that you can't anticipate really at the time. You're like, oh, I'm writing about this, but it's interesting the things that kind of stick out to people and they kind of come back to, and that's all part of it too. Like the you know
Mm.
yeah. So uh, yeah.
No,
Sorry,
that was a
I
really
fear
good.
I'm rambling because now I'm starting to think back
No.
about this, and I'm starting to revisit these things as we're talking.
Yeah.
It's all a funny process, but I am very grateful to have been able to finish it at all and to be well enough to do
Mm.
that. So yeah, and I
Yeah.
really, as I've said a number of times during our conversation, that it is really valuable when people are able to speak like we are.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, it's so nice because you don't have to kind of. I know, obviously, we're having to lay the context because it's a podcast, but like you wouldn't have had to have done that with me because I would just get it.
Yeah,
Like without all of that, if
yeah,
you just said like, "Oh, I've got really like out of it today," I would understand
exactly.
that exact feeling.
Exactly, yeah. Oh my goodness, yeah, isn't that a funny thing? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the amount of times where I'm just like use that shorthand like I'm so out of it today. And
Yeah.
it's funny because you hear other people say it and I'm like, are you really out of it? Do you really know what it's really like to be really out of it?
You have no idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wish like yeah, that's what I feel about like if people could just feel it for a minute or two, they'd know what out of it really, really meant.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is
yes.
frustrating. And I feel like as well, like I don't know if you have ever experienced this or if you do experience it right now, but running a podcast and having trouble with depersonalization in the form of voice separation is
Yes.
just the worst combination I can think of.
Yeah.
And it
I
makes me not want to podcast, but I have a podcast.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, it's so important touching on that because that is a really big like I think the way that you articulated that too, like voice separation is really that's really interesting. Because that is definitely something that is like a symptom which can be distressing for people if they don't, if they're experiencing it, for the first time. And I mean, my goodness, absolutely. I think also another thing, I mean, I don't know if you drive, but I think driving can also be like that sensory. I get like it's very easy to get like hardcore kind of sensory overload very quickly when you're driving,
yeah,
especially if you're
yeah.
feeling like that kind of sense of separation. I mean, especially because a car is such like a large kind of object, it's moving.
Mm.
It's but yeah, the voice separation is very very strong, and that can happen. Um, yeah, a podcast is. I mean, it's going to happen. I guess because prior to let's call it internet times, you and I would be talking face to face, or we wouldn't be talking at all. And I think that kind of embodied experience is so different. We could.
Mm.
Uh, but it's very admirable that you continue to stick with it despite these symptoms. And I think it's really interesting to get that kind of meta perspective too for people, for listeners to realize that actually there is an aspect of having a podcast like that you have, which reaches people and helps people, but also there is something about like something symptomatic kind of embedded in the process, and
Mm.
I can imagine that varies for you, but yeah, good on you for doing it, and thank you for doing it.
That's okay. It is like so interesting though because it sounds like we're both doing things that can be a little bit detrimental to us, but we know they're good because hopefully we're helping maybe at least one person out there to feel slightly seen. But I don't think people realize how detrimental it can be
It
to
can be
your own conditions. Like,
for
yeah.
sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, part of my absolutely. Like, there is no way that going through like the publication of the book and talking about it afterwards and the PR stuff. I mean, that was incredibly difficult
Mm,
because even though I spoke earlier about the importance of sharing the story and whatever, then you sometimes wonder after you do like an interview or like after someone writes about it or something, then you think, well, have I done it right? Like maybe it's
yeah.
incorrect. Maybe I've misunderstood Dr. Cernus and maybe I've misrepresented and that's the last thing that you want to do. So that kind of those fears kind of creep in as well. Like actually, what if I'm not doing a service to people, but actually a disservice unintentionally? And
Yeah.
those kind of things can kind of yeah creep in as well, and it's just and then the analytical brain takes over it. But it's yeah, but I mean even now I do things uh, that can potentially like exacerbate the symptoms, and one of the things is like my exposure to water or swimming, which is something that I've worked on for a really long time. And
Mm,
I'm a fairly new parent. I have a baby daughter who's just 10 months old, and becoming a father has been an incredible like crossing of a Rubicon for me. And one of the things that I would really like to do is to introduce, like, just to do something like in a way quite simple and everyday, which is to take my daughter like for a swim to for the pool or whatever, or to the sea.
hmm
And that I think that's hard, and you got to work on it, and like my exposure to water and that kind of thing is something that I want to do for myself as well as like my new family, but it's it comes at a cost and sacrifice, and you have to revisit things. And I've come a long way since that onset, but still it's like yeah, I don't know. Various people have discussed it in terms of like alcoholism or whatever. Like you never stop being an alcoholic, but you just don't drink. So you just don't drink anymore.
Yeah.
That's why you're not an alcoholic. So it's a constant like I'm able to immerse myself in water now, but it's like such a profound and overwhelming experience like earlier in my life that
hmm
even when I'm quote unquote fine while I'm swimming or like whatever, I'm still living with the knowledge that it has not been fine in the past. It's like a trace that you carry. It's like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
for that reason, but I'm not gonna stop trying to do that, or I'm not gonna like not ever swim with my daughter, for example.
hmm
So do you know what I mean? Like you have to, so I have to kind of embrace life and its activities, and
Yeah.
I don't want to shield. I don't, even if it costs me, and it's very difficult, and those kind of things, or are detrimental. I still really want to. I got to do them. I got to work on them. Otherwise, because that's what I want to be here for.
Yeah. You don't want to miss that opportunity with your daughter, do you?
Yeah,
But it's hard having to expose yourself to you know something like that you know is like a potential trigger. And I was going to ask you as well, like in the Guardian article, there's photos of you in water, and you're talking about water being such a like triggered. Like, did you actually do those photos?
I did. I did
Wow.
those photos. Yeah, and it was a cold day too, so it was. I mean, yeah. It's. I mean, I should. Yeah, it's definitely worth emphasizing that I have come a long way since then, so I can like
Yeah.
actually be in water. However, in that context, in the Guardian article where it was like the photographer's like, okay, well, this is clearly like a central part of the story, so
Yeah.
let's do this. Then I'm lucky enough that like the editor who I worked with and the journalist who wrote the story, like they were very understanding, and I was able to like take my time doing it.
Okay.
But again, like that was a pretty weird few days afterwards. Like I wanted to
hmm
do it for the book. I wanted to do it, for so that people would very clearly understand.
Yeah.
And but it was pretty weird. And to put it mildly, and the days afterwards, I was like, is this going to? Yeah, I mean, it all kind of is this gonna like gonna I don't know. I'm look. I'm writing about this thing, and then I'm also like being photographed as a representation of this thing. Like, what am I doing here? Like, this is. I mean, this is really potentially very detrimental. Um, but I was so passionate at that point about just doing what you have to do as well. Like, I didn't want to like be like, oh hey, because if someone writes a Guardian article about you, you won't. Who am I? I'm no diva who's going to be like, hey, I'm not doing this. I'm only doing this or whatever. Like, you just in a way you kind of go with it, and I was able
Yeah.
to like be understood, and like it was a process that was talked through, but I wasn't like, yeah, different friends and other writers told me that if you were going to have the opportunity to do something like this, then you should lean into it. And but it was a weird kind of, maybe I said 3 days, or maybe it was a weird week afterwards where I was like, what have I done, but it's it was okay. I was able to kind of draw a circle around the experience and be like, okay, this was this one thing which was for this specific purpose,
Mm.
and it was okay. I actually wasn't. I was able to cope with it. Okay, I think primarily because I knew going into it that things like that might be required. I didn't know it was going to be exactly that, but
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to be challenged in some way
Mhm.
like that. Uh, so that was a memorable day.
I
Um,
ask as well because I was like, I don't think it's AI, but in this world of many AI things, I was like, I should ask. But
no,
that's
it's a
really
great
cool that you
question.
did
The
it.
Guardian definitely wouldn't have published it if it was
Yeah.
AI. No, no, I went with it was a one photographer. Her name was Cybele, and she had an assistant, and I had a couple of change of outfits. It was like a whole. It was like most of a day we took, and it was there's many photographs in the same shoot, but they just chose that one. But
Mhm.
it was I definitely did it. I definitely got in the water. I can tell you.
You're like, I was there. But I think like it really backs up is the wrong word, but it's really strong imagery, and you can really kind of like it really adds to the article, like you're in the thick of it kind of thing.
Oh,
So I
thanks for
think
saying that,
that's
because
okay. I think
that makes me think
also
it's worth
like
it.
yeah, exactly. Because again, I know it would have been detrimental to you in some way or form. So the fact that you did it and stuck with it, yeah, is just a testament to all the things all the things you're doing and are trying in just to like help other people. And I'll make sure to link the Guardian article as well. But yeah, it's been an hour and a half. I'm so so sorry.
Oh, please don't
But
apologize. I'm very grateful. I'm really this is one of the more interesting conversations I've had. So thank you so much. I really
oh yeah.
appreciate it.
So where can people buy your book? Where can people find out more about you on the internet? Feel free to plug everything and anything.
Oh yeah. So thank you. My book is called When Nothing Feels Real, and it's available. I mean, it's available on Amazon, at Blackwell's, all the major like UK chains. I mean,
Mhm,
Waterstones, etc. If you want to get it there, and if you're interested in reading something about it prior to buying the book or whatever, the Guardian article is a good kind of primer, I would say.
mhm,
It goes into some of more detail of what we've been talking about today. Um, but yeah, that's the main thing. I mean, I have a website which you can find, just putting my last name is spelled Dunne, so it's Nathan Dunn. That's but if anyone wants to get in contact with me, my contact details are back page of my website.
mhm.
But yeah, pretty much the most interesting, difficult, and important things that have happened in my life are written about in my book, and I've spent quite a number of years trying to get that right. And yeah, look, there's romance in there, sadness and illness, and yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to make it easy for people to read as well, as I
Mhm.
think may be obvious from the conversation that we've had. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's my
definitely.
memoir, and yeah, it's you should be able to get it anywhere that you want in the UK. So
I was just going to say I actually have a copy on the way because I didn't get a chance to read it before speaking to you. So I will definitely be very interested to read it now, even more so than I was before.
oh, thank you, Emily. Well, I appreciate you, like, buying a copy and reading it too. So it's I'm very grateful for that. So yeah, but just to any listeners who want to write to me, or if you listen to this in the future, just have a Gmail email and just contact me via my website, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I'll help you the best that I can.
Amazing. Thank you so much.